Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Expert Classroom. I am so excited to be here with you today. Thank you all for joining us. Today, we're going to be meeting an expert in storytelling and story writing. It's Matt Stanton, everyone. Hi, Matt.
Hello. Hey, Katie. How are you?
I'm really good, really good. Welcome back to the Expert Classroom. It's your second visit with us.
It is. Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to be back.
Oh, no problem at all. We are very, very excited. So I just thought we'd have a bit of a chat today about what makes you an amazing storyteller. And I know that we've got some very excited viewers here with us today that have got their own questions to send in as well. Now, you're a seasoned pro at answering questions online. So I'm hoping that you're going to be able to lead this.
We'll see how we go. Oh, it's really wonderful. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
So do you want to give us a little bit of background before we jump in about who you are and what you do?
Certainly. So my name is Matt Stanton, and I am an author, which means I write books. I'm an illustrator, which means I draw the pictures in my books. And I also am a bit of a YouTuber. I create a YouTube video from here in my studio every day. So that's what I do. I make funny kids books. I work here in my studio every day. Sometimes when it's not crazy coronavirus season, I spend a bunch of time traveling around and in schools. But increasingly now that we're all staying put a bit more, I'm doing heaps of kind of live broadcasting and things like this, chatting to you guys and answering questions and doing anything that I can to encourage your creativity.
Oh, well, that's super exciting because I'm hoping that you'll be able to pass some of those skills onto us today. So the first thing that I wanted to kind of talk to you about, and something that we mentioned in our video that you can find on our Expert Classroom website, is about how to actually build a story. So on the screen, we've got one of your hilarious characters, the duck there, showing us how a story mountain works. So do you want to kind of give us a bit of an explanation about what a story mountain actually is and how you use them?
Certainly. So I always tell a kind of funny story with my own kids. When they ask me to tell them a story, I say, once upon a time, there was a girl called Sarah. She went to school. She had a great day, the end. And they go, that's a boring story. Like, that's an incredibly boring story. And the reason that it's a boring story, they're right, it is a boring story. The reason that it's a boring story is because it doesn't use a story mountain. Okay, and so you can see on your screen there, and I'm looking at it too, an introduction, then kind of setting the scene one day, and then a complication right at the top of the mountain. Sometimes we use the word complication, sometimes we use the word problem. Something needs to go wrong with the kind of plan, with where the story's going. And then what you need to do when you write a story is you solve that complication, you solve the problem, and that takes you back down again to the ending. So a story kind of goes up the mountain, hits a problem, solves the problem, and comes back down the mountain. And that's what makes our stories interesting.
Fantastic. Now you have got a bit of a secret to writing a story mountain and writing the way you put kind of problems in your story. So I've got a bit of a clip here. Do you mind if I just show this to everybody?
Go for it.
See if we can play this.
But then to work out like what's going to happen in my story. This is before I start actually writing the words of my story. I want to think about what's going to happen in the story. So then I used this trick that I use. And I call this trick putting a but in it. Okay, because it's easy to remember, putting a but in it. And what I mean is, think about what's going to happen in the story and then twist your story by going, but then this happened instead. Okay, so I'm going to tell you how I did that in the story. Okay, so the first thing is Summer goes to the beach, right? She goes to the beach. So I decided she's going to go to the beach. Goes to the beach, but you remember from yesterday? The beach was closed. Okay, she was going to go to the beach. We think she's just going to the beach, she's going to swim. But twist the story, the beach is closed.
So that's how you've kind of done it. You talk about putting a but into it. And we can see in the next story mountain there that when you put in a but into a story, it gives it a bit of a twist.
Exactly. And you can also see in these YouTube videos the varying level of my own facial hair. So yes, so I use this trick all the time, and it's important that I clarify something with this idea of putting a but in it. What I don't mean when I say that is use the word but in your story a lot, okay? Because that will drive your teacher nuts, okay? Don't do that. What I mean is using it to build your story mountain, okay? To work out the plot of your story, the shape of your story. And it's also often really handy if you get stuck. So if you're writing your story and you kind of can't work out what to do next, or you've kind of lost interest, or you want to write about something else now, then this idea of putting a but in it, going, this was what was going to happen, but what happens if this happened instead? Okay, so you're twisting the story. And that can make it more interesting for you to write too, because you don't always know what's going to happen next.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that your characters in a lot of your books get up to some pretty interesting exploits. Now we've got a question from Leo. Hi, Leo. Leo is 5 and he's asking a question about his favorite book, The Book That Never Ends.
Hi, Leo.
Very, very good book. And his question is, how old were you when you wrote that book?
Well, Leo, thank you for your question. How old was I when I wrote The Book That Never Ends? Well, I'm 36 now. Okay, the book was published last year, so I was 35, but I kind of wrote it the year before, so 34.
Very good. There you go. Very simple question. Thanks, Leo, for your question. And if anybody else listening to us today and joining us has got a question, pop it in the chat box. We want to get all of your questions to Matt. He's very excited to answer all of your questions. So let's have a little move on and see what we've got next. So tools of the trade. Now, being an author and an illustrator isn't just about using a pen and paper. Is that right?
That's true. There's lots of different tools and tricks you can use.
So what kind of things do you have stashed away in your office that help you do your job a little bit easier?
Okay, so well, the big obvious thing is this giant kind of thing here, which I was going to turn on for you, and then I realized it's connected to this laptop, which I'm talking to you through. So anyway, but if you go, on the YouTube channel, there's a bunch of videos where I use this. This is what I draw into. Okay, so a lot of my, well, all of my drawing now is digital. Okay, so I'm not grabbing a piece of paper and a pen so much and drawing on here. But when I say that, kids often think, and teachers often think, oh, that means I'm basically just typing on my computer and pressing buttons and magically illustrations come out. That's not how it works. So I've got a pen, just like you have a pen, except this pen, I don't know if you can see that, this pen draws onto here. And if I push harder with this pen, it makes my line thicker. If I pull off lightly with my pen, it makes the line thinner, just like it would with a real texter or marker. And so that's what I do. And so I sit here and I draw on here. One of my other favorite little tricks is that this is a standing desk. So I can do this.
Oh, so fancy.
Which I'm not going to do for ages for you. But that's really fun because often I like to draw and work standing up. Which is helpful. So I do most of my drawing into programs like Photoshop and things like that. But really and seriously, it is just like drawing on a piece of paper. It's the same thing. All it means is that I save the paper, so I'm not wasting paper all the time. And also, if I need to travel or if I need to move around, I can take, well, at least my laptop and stuff with me and keep working.
Year 2 at St. John's Grammar School ask, how do you think of all of the stories?
Oh, what a great question. Thanks, guys. So most of the books that I create different series of books, okay? So I've got my Funny Kids series, which is like these ones, okay? And that's Max and stuff. You can see Max on your screen. Then I've got like the Crazy Book series. I've got Pea and Nut, which is my picture book series. And at the moment I'm creating a new graphic novel series. So I come up with the kind of original idea, and that comes for me from thinking about who I want to make the book for. Okay, so rather than me sitting down and thinking, what's an idea for a story, I think about who I want to create a story for. And then I think, what would they be interested in? What do they like to laugh about? What's the most kind of wonderful, amazing, kind of funny, hilarious thing I can think of for them? And I find that kind of a helpful way to start. And then once I've got the series, then I'm looking at my characters to give me ideas. So I'm thinking about Max and Abby and Hugo and Tyson and Pip in Funny Kid, and I'm thinking, what would they do if this happened? Or what would they do if this happened? And I'm kind of throwing things at them and seeing what they do.
That's really interesting. It's very similar to the way we in schools use the design thinking concept, because it's starting with a person. So it's quite similar in that way. Is that right?
Exactly. So my background is, before I was doing this, I was a graphic designer, and graphic design. I used to design book covers for other people's books, and graphic designers use design thinking all the time. And so I have brought exactly design thinking into how I work.
Oh, there you go. So any students joining us today that are using the design thinking process, you guys can do this too. A very, very short step and very similar skill. Thanks, Matt. That's amazing. Now we've got a question from 4D. Hi, 4D. They ask, what is your favorite story you've written?
Ah, good question, 4D. That's a hard one. That's like asking me which one of my kids is my favorite kid. So I think at the moment, well, okay, so usually the way that I answer that is kind of whatever I'm working on at the moment is kind of my favorite thing, because I get completely kind of immersed in it. So at the moment I'm doing two things, okay? I'm creating Funny Kid 8, okay, which is called Funny Kid Belly Flop, and that comes out later in the year. So I'm creating a new Funny Kid book. I'm also creating The Odds, which is this graphic novel, whatever I did with it. There it is this new graphic novel series. Now, I've never made a graphic novel before, so it's all very new and very kind of interesting for me, so that's been a lot of fun. But then I also really like the Pea and Nut characters. I really, really like this panda and the flamingo and kind of the fun that they get up to together. So I'm sorry, 4D, I'm not giving you a very good answer, but oh, look, I really like Max from Funny Kid. I really like Funny Kid, and I've spent probably the most time with him.
Would you say that Max is, I guess, your most famous character as well?
Yes, probably. He's certainly the one that's traveled the furthest around the world. Further than I have.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Max gets up to all sorts. Now we've got a question from Ved. Hi, Ved. Ved is from St. John's Grammar as well. And they ask, how did Matt think of the book that never ends? Ooh.
Oh, so good question. So hang on, let me grab it from somewhere. Here it is. No, it's not. There it is. So that's this one. Now I make this series of books with my wife Beck. So we make them together. And all of the books, there's 5 books in this series, and they're all games. Okay, they're sort of games rather than stories. And this one, have you guys heard of Choose Your Own Adventure books? So this is like a choose your own adventure book, like a choose your own path story, except it's a picture book rather than like a novel. And so what we thought was, what if you took that idea? See, I really like to twist things, right? I really like to take an idea and twist it. So we said, what happens if we took this kind of choose your own adventure book idea, we put it in a picture book instead of a novel, but instead of it having lots of different endings, what happens if it took you round and round in circles? That actually, it's like going into a maze and you get lost, and every choice takes you round and round in circles, except for there is a way out. There is actually a way to get to the end of the book, and that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get to the end. And so then once we kind of had that idea, then we had to kind of work out how to make it. It was really complicated. We basically had to draw it like a maze, draw it like a map, and kind of write it that way. But it's a lot of fun. This is one of my favorite ones to read when I visit schools. I get someone out the front and they have to make all the choices, and it's lots of fun.
Wow, it does sound very complicated though. Do you at least do that with a pen and paper, or is all of that on your screen as well?
No, we did use a pen and paper for that for sure, yes. Because it was kind of drawing and scribbling and like, no, then it has to go that way, or, oh no, that's ended us up. Like, we got lost in it ourselves.
Oh my goodness me. Well, there you go. Even authors get lost in their own works. So before we move on, Matt, I thought you might want to play a little game with me. Are you up for a bit of this?
Sure.
Okay, so I've got some of your book titles here, and I want you to see if you can remember if they are real books that you've written or if I've sneakily made a few up. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, well, let's start with an easy one.
Okay.
For President. Is that a real book or is that a fake book?
That is a real book.
And what's so special about Funny Kid for President?
So Funny Kid for President is the first Funny Kid story. Lots of people in Australia ask me, why is it President and not Prime Minister? Which is a very good question. And the reason is because in Max's class, they're running for class president. Okay, so he's running for class president, but he has a kind of ulterior motive, which you'll get when you read the story. Oh,
there you go. There's a bit of a spoiler there. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Funny Kid, Peking Duck. Oh. Real or fake?
This one is real. This one is real. But not spelt the way that you're supposed to spell Peking duck. Peking duck is a very yummy dish, like a very yummy dinner dish, but you spell Peking differently. But Duck is one of my favorite characters in the Funny Kid books, and he kind of deserved his own book. And he does a lot of peeking in this one, so I went with that title.
Very good. Well, let's do one more before we dive into some more questions. Funny Kid Toilet Time.
Well, okay, so that is fake for now. I really like it. I like it, and I might be stealing it. Hang on, I'm writing it down.
Copyright.
Toilet time. I like it.
All right, we've got a couple of questions here. Riley from RB at St. John's would like to know how you make books. Oh, that is a good question, Riley.
Good question. Okay, so how I make books. So I'm going to choose, there's a couple of ways to answer this question depending on exactly what Riley means. So it was Riley, right? So I'm going to guess a way that you mean, because I can tell you about writing stories, and we're kind of talking about that anyway. But often when kids ask me that question, what they mean is, how do I get the physical book in my hand? Okay, and so I have a quick way that I can answer that, which is it's a cool adventure. Okay, so I create all of the book, I create all of the pictures and all of the words, and I send it off to my publisher, which is a company that makes a business that we work with that helps make books, and they send it off to a printer. The printer has two printers, okay, and so they put their first printer on and they print all of the pages that are going on the inside of the book on thin paper. Okay, then they get their second printer and they print the cover like this, flat like this, on cardboard on their second printer. Right? Then this machine comes along and it picks up all of the pages on the inside like that, and it runs the cover along like that, and it pushes the paper down onto the cover with glue all along the bottom. Okay? Then this cool claw thing comes along and it goes slam, and it like squeezes it together. Now, you can imagine putting those two things together. How could you possibly get all of the pages and the cover to line up next to each other? Well, they don't, okay? So what happens is it goes along, it doesn't all line up, but then it gets to the end of the conveyor belt and this guillotine comes along, this giant knife, and it goes and it cuts off all of the edges to match and be the same. Then it drops off into a box, the box goes into a truck, or if it's a black and white book like here, it's printed in South Australia. If it is a colour book, like my picture books, it is printed in China. So then it either goes onto a boat if it's in China, or into a truck if it's in South Australia, and it goes off to bookstores and libraries, and that's where you guys can find them.
Wow. Now that was a very long answer, but Riley, I hope we've answered your question. That was a fantastic explanation. Thanks, Matt.
No worries.
Next question is from 2M at St. John's, and they ask, why did you become an author?
Why did I become an author? Okay, I lost you a little bit there, Katie, but I think I'm going to answer the question anyway. So why did I become an author? So I became an author because I always loved creating stories, and I always liked drawing pictures. Okay, but I had this experience when I was 11, which is that I wrote a story in class, and my teacher tried to make it as funny as I could, and my teacher got me to stand up in front of the whole school assembly and read my story to everyone, which I was terrified about doing, but I did it, and it made lots of my friends laugh. And I had this kind of moment of like, whoa, this is pretty cool, actually. That, like, you know, when you tell a joke and it like really works and your friends laugh and it's like, oh, that feels amazing. Well, it was kind of like that, except the joke had come from my imagination. The story had come from my imagination. And so from then on, I kind of got a little bit obsessed with this idea of like using my imagination to create stories and pictures that made my friends laugh. And that's pretty much what I do now.
Fantastic. Just checking that you can still hear me all right, Matt.
I can hear you great. Much better.
Okay. The next question is, what's your favorite type of book to create?
Oh, that's a good question. So I create lots of different types, as you've seen. So picture books, graphic novels, and novels. I'm not sure if I can pick, because there's like favorite bits I like about each of them. So novels, you have a lot more words to play with, right? So you can tell a lot more story, which is fun, and I like doing that with Funny Kid. But with a picture book, you've kind of they look like they're easy to write, but they're almost harder to write because it's hard to make things short. Mark Twain, who's a famous author who's dead now, was famously quoted as writing a letter to somebody and saying, I'm sorry to write you such a long letter. I didn't have time to write you a short one. So in other words, like it takes longer to write something shorter because you have to work out what to leave out and what are the absolutely necessary things, and you can't waste any words. And then graphic novels are like that. This is new for me, and this is what I'm doing now, and I'm loving doing that because you've got to tell your whole story visually. So you can't describe anything that's happening. So you've got to show it all the time, which is a really interesting way of thinking about how to create a story.
Yeah. Was it scary trying something new for the first time when you started the graphic novel?
Yeah, it was a bit scary, but also really fun. Like, I kind of like the challenge. It's scary in that I never really know if it's going to work. But it's scary and fun. But I think often, like, the really great things are both of those things at once. The best things are also sometimes the hard things, and that's okay.
Absolutely. All right, next question. We've got, a nice quick one. How many books have you written?
28. 28 books.
And what's the latest one that we can get at the moment?
The Funny Kid Peking Duck. That one came out a couple of months ago. And I've got a whole bunch more coming out later in the year, but some of them have been pushed back a bit because of coronavirus. So I've got another Pea and Nut book, another Funny Kid book, The Odds, the graphic novel. They're all coming out later this year.
Very exciting. Now, James in 5F at St. John's. Hi, James. He asks, do you still have the story you read out when you were 11?
I do. Thanks for that question, James. So, and I even have a video of it. So if you want to go onto my YouTube channel later, what I decided to do was, so amazing story, right? So I wrote this story when I was 11, and I didn't have a computer when I was 11, and so my teacher typed it up for me on one of the school computers, and what I didn't know was she kept it. She kept the printout for like 26 years. I think it was 26 in the end. 26 years, and then gave it back to me. So I went back to my old school for something, and she had my story. So what I did was I made a YouTube video of me reading it again for the first time. So it's on there. The funny thing was it was quite different to how I'd remembered it. Like, my imagination had changed it in my memory. And some of the funniest bits that I thought were in it weren't in it at all.
Oh, wow. So we can find that on your YouTube channel, is that right?
Yeah.
Excellent. Now, would you recommend that we all write a story now to look back on in 26 years?
That is such a great idea. Yes, definitely.
Excellent. Well, there you go. If you're in 5F or 2M or anybody else joining us today, write a story today and have your teacher put it in a box and come back to it in 26 years.
No pressure, teachers.
No pressure. Sorry. I know you've got some other bits going on. All right. Last real or fake question before we move on. Funny kids space boogers. Is that real or is that fake?
Oh, I wish that was real. That's amazing. I'm writing that one down too. It's fake, but I like it. Space boogers. What is in that?
While we're on the subject of toilet time and space boogers, why are farts and poos so funny?
Oh, that is a great question. That is a great question. And I'm sure everybody probably has their own answer to that. I have a theory. Okay, I have a theory, and it doesn't have a lot to do with the fact that it's gross. Okay, because what we found, Tim Miller and I, we created a bunch of fart picture books together. So the Fart Monster, Dinosaur Dump, a whole bunch of kind of picture books about weird stuff your body does. And what we found was we made one that we think crossed the line. Okay, we think it went too far. And it was called Don't Spew in Your Spacesuit. And it was all about like why you shouldn't vomit in a gravity-free environment.
I mean, a very important question.
Yeah. And I think it's not just about making it as gross as you can, as though that will make it funnier, because it kind of doesn't work like that. And what my theory is that it's got nothing to do with the gross stuff and a lot to do with surprise. Okay, I think the thing that makes us laugh is surprise. That's why if I tell a joke and you laugh, and like it's a really good joke and you laugh and it's funny, and then I tell it to you 5 more times, the exact same joke over and over again, it's the same joke, but it's not funny anymore because the surprise is gone. And I think most of the time that's why kind of bodily functions are funny, both kind of in real life. If you're sitting in class and somebody farts, that's a surprise, right? No one was expecting that to happen. That's funny. If that person then farts 5 times in a row, that's just gross. And I think often in books when we use toilet humor, it's almost like, oh, I can't believe that's in a book, or I can't believe the word fart is giant across the front of a picture book. It's things like that. I think it's about surprise. That's the kind of the secret trick.
Oh, there you go. So all of you toilet humor kids, get some surprise in your books as well. Question from Will in 5F. Hi, Will. He asks, what was your favorite story to write?
Oh, good question, Will. Thanks. My favorite story to write. I really enjoyed writing Funny Kid Prank Wars. Okay, because this one was all about pranks, and I used that kind of putting a butt in it idea all the time in this book, because I realized that pranks work in the same way by this kind of idea of putting a butt in it. Like, one thing was gonna happen, but then something else happened instead. I was just going to walk into the other room, but my sister put a bucket of water on top of the door frame and now I'm soaking wet. That sort of thing, right? So I was using that idea all the time. And in this book, the pranks just get worse and worse and worse. Like, it just escalates. And that was really fun. So I'm thinking about doing another one of those, I think, like another prank-themed Funny Kid book.
Oh, interesting. So while we're on the subject of funny characters, I mean, Max is hilarious. He's called the funny kid, right?
Mm.
So when you were creating Max, what did you have to think about?
So what I try to do mostly when I'm trying to create funny characters is try to combine 2 things that don't normally go together. That's one of the kind of secret tricks that I kind of use to try to put something together within a character that makes them surprising and kind of surprising in themselves. That helps to make them funny. So the fart monster, for example, was about what happens if the monster under your bed isn't scary? What happens if he's smelly? What if we combine farting and smelliness with the monster under the bed? What do you get instead? So Max is kind of interesting. Max doesn't feel like he fits anywhere. Like he doesn't really He's not the smartest kid in the class. He's not the fastest kid. He's not the best looking kid. And so he's kind of insecure in that sense. And yet he's also determined that he is kind of the greatest thing in the universe, and he's just undiscovered. And so he's not particularly smart, but he's incredibly ambitious and incredibly confident. And so he's kind of a combination of factors. And so that means that if there's ever a competition, which there usually is in one of the Funny Kid books, like, he is determined to win. Like, he must win, no matter, even if he hates sport, right? But put a sport competition in front of him, and now he needs to compete because he's desperately trying to prove his greatness all the time, which usually doesn't work. And so that's kind of where the humor comes from. It's the combining these things that don't really naturally fit together.
Yeah, okay. Now that's quite a lot to think about. And Josephine's got a great question here. She asks, if Matt, does Matt go into the learning pit when he has a new book coming out? Now, do you know what a learning pit is, Matt?
I don't. I'm sorry. Can you tell me?
Oh, so a learning pit, in very, very simple terms, and I'm sure the students joining us know how to explain it much better than me. But when you're in the learning pit, you're not quite there yet, and you don't really know where you're going and how you're going to get there, but you know that you've got to get up there somewhere. So do you ever feel like that when you've got a new book coming out or when you're creating something new?
Definitely. Absolutely. Yes, all the time.
And
That's a great metaphor. I like that a lot.
Good one, isn't it? How do you cope with that feeling? Is there anything that you do to help your creativity?
I think, well, if I'm ever stuck, what I try to do is do something else that's creative but in a different way. So that's one of the reasons that I really like being able to use drawing. And in fact, when I visit schools, I'll ask a class, this happens exactly the same every class I visit every time. I'll ask the class who likes writing, and half the hands will go up, and I'll say who likes drawing, and like almost all the hands go up. And I actually use drawing a lot to help me when I get stuck. So I'll even create characters by drawing them first, or by kind of exploring them by drawing them. And so if I'm stuck with writing, often I'll go and draw the story a little bit, or draw a scene from the story, and all the while my subconscious is working away on those problems, and I'll kind of jump back and forth.
Fantastic. That's a really good way to get around that author's block, I think, sometimes. Now, we've got a video next of you actually drawing Max from Funny Kids. And I have sped it up because I know that the original video is about 5 minutes long, but I've sped it up into about 30 seconds. Now, how long did it take you to come up with the concept of how Max looked?
So I kind of sketched him out a handful of different times. The kind of big decision that I had to make with Funny Kid, with kind of illustrating, was that I knew I was going to have to draw him hundreds of times. And also that I wanted to create a whole world of characters. There's kind of a handful of new characters in each Funny Kid book. And they all needed to kind of feel like they fit in terms of the style. So all of the characters in Funny Kid, for example, you never see them at a 3/4 angle. Okay, you see them front on or you see them side on, but you never see them 3/4. And so that was kind of a decision that I made, and kind of making choices around the style to help me to draw them. Then, what are angry eyebrows going to look like? What is a screaming mouth going to look like? And it took a while. You're kind of bouncing back and forth all the time and making changes and trying to work out how to get these characters all kind of fitting into a world. And then that style is different, say, to the style in the Odds or the style in the Fart Monster books or something like that.
Okay, so James at St. John's in 5F says, how do you get the ideas for your characters? So is Max based on anyone you know?
Oh, that's a great question. So I don't tend to base characters on specific people, as in I don't take that whole person and try to put them into a character, but I definitely get inspiration and ideas from real people and from myself a lot. So So, for instance, the first Funny Kid book with Max is about Max realizing that he's not kind of the best at anything except that he can make people laugh. And he realizes that making people laugh is really empowering and really fun. Now, that experience kind of happened to me. That story I told you before about reading my story out when I was 11. Now, that doesn't happen to Max. Something else happens to Max. But that idea of like, oh, making people laugh is pretty cool. That's me, and that's me in Max. And similarly with the Odds, I'm creating this brand new character called Kip, and she's the main character in the Odds, and so there's lots of me in her, even though she's a girl and I'm a boy, and she doesn't have a mum and I do have a mum, and she lives in a city and I live in the suburbs, and so I'm looking all the time for a kind of a bit of truth, I guess, to put into the character, and then you exaggerate like crazy.
See, that is a really, really good way of thinking about it, and something that maybe when you're creating a story for the first time you wouldn't have thought about at all. So that's really interesting. So now we've got a quick fire question round, and I did have questions prepared, but actually we've got so many questions in the chat box here, so I'm going to go through some of these.
Okay.
I ask, would you rather do another series of Funny Kid books or more picture books?
Oh, both. Yeah, I'm lucky I don't have to pick. I'm going to keep doing Funny Kid as long as everyone's reading them, and I'm going to create new series at the same time because I like doing all of it.
Fantastic. So back to you, Ella. Would you rather write a Funny Kid book or would you rather do a picture book? Angela asks, do you have cliffhanger endings in the Funny Kid books?
No, because I find them very frustrating if I'm as a reader. Okay, so I think you want to get to the. I have things that point to the next book. So, for instance, at the end of Funny Kid Stand Up, they mention, like, the story finishes, but they mention that next week they're going on a school camping trip. Well, the school camping trip is this story, right? But I don't think that's a cliffhanger because the story finishes. I think you want the story to finish.
Perfect. Who's your favorite author other than yourself?
Oh, well, I'm not my favorite author, so that's easy. I'm loving reading Roald Dahl with my kids at the moment. I read Roald Dahl as a kid, and at the moment, Bonnie, my 7-year-old, we're reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and we just finished Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We've just started Matilda. I want to do George's Marvelous Medicine because that's one of my favorites.
Oh yeah, my favorite too. Oh, just before we move on, reception at St. John's Grammar have to go, but thank you for joining us, reception. We hope to see you next time. Marley in 5F asks, how long does it take you to write a book? Oh,
good question. Okay, so I do 2 Funny Kid books a year at the moment. So I guess it's about 6 months worth of work, but it's spread out over a year. So I write the Funny Kid book normally about a year before it comes out into shops. But I'm also doing lots of books at the same time. So at the moment now I can write a Funny Kid book fairly fast. So I'll actually do the writing over kind of 3 or 4 weeks. But it's all kind of spread out with lots of projects happening at the same time.
Awesome. All right, last question. Who should read your books?
Oh, everyone. No. So if you like laughing, and yeah, just try one. And if you find it funny, keep reading. And if you don't, find something else. That's fine. But yes, I'm trying to make books that are funny and entertaining, and so that if you find reading difficult or challenging, or you're not that interested in reading, that when you write my books, you kind of almost don't notice that you're reading. The story just kind of grabs you and pulls you along.
Now, I was going to take you through the editing, but we did talk about that a little bit, and I think we've run out of time. We're now 40 minutes in. But Matt, thank you so much for joining us in the Expert Classroom today. Is there anything you want to say to all of the kids joining us today?
I just want to encourage you that you are creative, that your imagination is amazing, and that using your imagination is both fun and really powerful. So do it, make stuff, create stuff, make the world better.
Amazing. Thanks so much for joining us in the Expert Classroom today. Come back next week for another live Q&A. And remember, to be an expert, learn, practice, and share every day. And we'll see you next time. Bye.